This is Litigating History. In this video, we're going to try to make a deep dive into the historical record of a discrete historical fact that is highly disputed to see where the weight of the evidence takes us. In this video, we're going to look at the Battle of Nijmegen on September 17, 1944, and the performance of General James Gavin, commanding officer of the American 82nd Airborne Division. Some claim his decisions on this day resulted in the failure of the entire Operation Market Garden. This is the third in a series of videos. In the first video, we discussed how the decision to de-emphasize the Nijmegen Bridge as a Day 1 objective was made by Gavin's boss, Corps Commander General Frederick Browning, not Gavin. In the second video, we discussed why this was a rational military decision based upon the pre-drop intelligence. In this third video, we are going to discuss Gavin's Day 1 orders to the 508 Parachute Infantry Regiment. Was there a misunderstanding between Gavin and his subordinates, a fabricated order, or a misunderstanding by historians looking for conflict? This is Gavin's graphic history of the 82nd Airborne Division. It is a document prepared by the 82nd during or shortly after the war. It contains maps, graphs, charts, and a brief narrative of events for the 82nd and Operation Market Garden. This map shows the conduct of the battle by the 82nd Division during the first 2 days of the battle. The red in this map shows the exploits of the 504 Parachute Infantry Regiment on those first 2 days. You can see the 504 landed on both sides of the Maas River and seized the major bridge at Grave by an immediate coup de main from both sides. The 82nd clearly knew how to do this when they wanted to. They also attempted to capture 4 bridges over the Maas Wall Canal and succeeded in capturing 2 of them. They also cleared the area to the north and northwest and seized the town of Alverna. The blue is the 505 Parachute Infantry Regiment. This regiment landed on the Groesbeek Heights, seized Groesbeek itself and the high ground around it. They also assisted with the capture of 2 of the bridges over the canal and set up a defensive perimeter facing the Reichswald forest. The green is the 508 Parachute Infantry Regiment, commanded by Colonel Roy E. Lindquist. They landed on the northern part of the Groesbeek Heights and were responsible for defending that portion of the ridge. They also had to secure high ground at Bergen-Dahl and De Ploeg, as well as secure the low ground south of Nijmegen. Finally, they had to assist in the capture of 2 of the canal bridges. It was the 1st Battalion of the 508, commanded by Major Shields Warren, the circle in the middle at the Ploeg, that was tasked with taking the Nijmegen Bridge on Day 1. It was the orders given to this battalion and its execution of those orders that have been scrutinized. As you can see, the map indicates that the 1st Battalion seized its objective at the Ploeg at 1830 hours, about 6:30 p.m., shortly before sunset. After that, it sent 2 companies into Nijmegen to attempt to take the bridge. The defense was fierce, and the 2 companies from the 2 battalions fought all night for the bridge, but could never get closer than 400 yards. In the morning, they were pulled out and ordered back to the Groesbeek Heights. As they pulled out, Company G from the 3rd Battalion attacked from a different route. They too ran into fierce resistance and failed to seize the bridge. After that, another attempt on the bridge would not be made until late in the day on the 19th, the 3rd day of the battle, after the link-up with the Guards Armored Division. And the bridge itself would not be taken until late on the 4th day, the 20th, after an heroic crossing of the Wall River by the 504. Some say it is this failure to take the bridge on Day 1 that delayed the 30th Corps' advance and doomed the 1st Airborne in Arnhem. So historians have looked for and found controversy in the orders given to the 508 and its 1st Battalion. Here is the actual field order issued to the 82nd Airborne, Gavin's written orders to his troops as of September 11. Here are the 508's objectives and instructions. The 508 was ordered to seize, organize, and hold the key terrain features in its area of responsibility and be prepared to seize the wall crossing at Nijmegen. The regiment was not ordered to attack the bridge. It was ordered to seize and defend its area of responsibility, and then they were to be prepared to move on the bridge upon Gavin's order. There was no order to attack the bridge, only an order to be prepared to do so. However, that was September 11. Perhaps Gavin supplemented these orders before they jumped. Gavin claims he personally directed Colonel Lindquist to send in his 1st Battalion without delay after landing, but to keep an eye on the situation if he needed to call off the attack to protect himself from the Reichswald. So defending the high ground was still priority 1, and the phrase without delay is kind of vague. Does he mean immediately after landing, or without delay after securing his area of responsibility as specified in his written orders? The meaning of this statement, made after the fact, is unclear and does not indicate what Gavin's exact orders were prior to jump. However, MacDonald, reading this vague account, assumed that Gavin meant that Lindquist was ordered to attack the bridge immediately after landing, and he claims that there is a dispute between Gavin and Lindquist over what Gavin's orders actually were. Lindquist claims his orders were not to go immediately against the bridge. Warren's battalion was to secure the initial objective at the Plogue and then be prepared to go into Nijmegen later. So according to MacDonald, we now have 2 conflicting stories. Gavin is saying one thing, attack immediately, and Lindquist is saying another, just be prepared to attack later. Historians love conflict like this. One of them must be wrong or lying, and again, perhaps Gavin is lying and trying to pin the blame of his failure on one of his subordinates. MacDonald is the official U.S. Army history. His work is thoroughly researched and refers to footnotes to authoritative primary sources. So if MacDonald says there was a misunderstanding between Gavin and Lindquist, that becomes a staple of historical storytelling and has been repeated by nearly all historians. However, was there really a misunderstanding? Did Gavin really claim that he ordered Lindquist to attack the bridge immediately? Well, what do the official records say, and can they be reconciled with both officers' version of events? Among the research material provided to Cornelius Ryan is this report from the Assistant Chief of Staff, G4 Section, 82nd Airborne Division. This report was generated shortly after the war in October of 1945, so you may elect to take a grain of salt with it. However, it recounts a meeting on September 16, right before the start of the battle, between Gavin and his unit commanders, at which Lindquist was directed to seize the high ground in the vicinity of Bergen-Dahl as his primary mission and attempt to seize the bridge with a small force, less than a battalion, where there appears to be a handwritten correction not to exceed. So there is written evidence that prior to the jump, Lindquist was ordered to make a day 1 attempt on the bridge. The high ground was still his primary mission, but he was also supposed to make a move on the bridge with a small force, either less than or not to exceed a battalion. Here is an excerpt from Airborne Warfare, a book published by General Gavin in 1947, not too long after the war. Gavin recognized that the anticipated defense of Nijmegen and the bridge was supposed to be so strong that an attack by a regimental combat team would be required if they hoped to take the bridge. Nevertheless, Gavin claims that just before takeoff, he directed Lindquist to commit not more than a battalion to seize the bridge as soon as possible after landing. This quote has been cited by historians to demonstrate the disagreements or inconsistencies between the understandings of Gavin and Lindquist concerning the verbal order, laced with the implication that Gavin may be lying after the fact and trying to pin the blame on a subordinate. To be fair, this statement in Gavin's own book does appear to be consistent with what was reported by MacDonald. However, what is significant is the very next statement, so as to take advantage of both surprise and darkness. Lindquist's regiment landed around 1:30 in the afternoon. Darkness would not have been for another 6 or 7 hours later, so to make any sense of this statement, as soon as possible after landing, must mean as soon as possible after landing and the securing of the high ground, which was the regiment's primary mission, and which will obviously take about 6 or 7 hours. Only then could an attempt on the bridge take advantage of darkness. Gavin is largely consistent in his second book, On to Berlin, published much later in 1978. In it, he claims that he told Lindquist that if things were quiet in the late afternoon, he was to send a battalion against the bridge, again under cover of darkness. So Gavin consistently assumed a delay after landing of 6 or 7 hours while the battalion was securing its primary objectives on the high ground before any attempt on the bridge would be made under cover of darkness. Here is another excerpt from Gavin's Airborne Warfare, and I think this resolves once and for all the issue of whether Gavin was trying to pin the blame on his subordinate. He, Lindquist, planned accordingly, and shortly after 1800 hours D-Day, when the situation in the regimental sector appeared to be in hand, he ordered Lieutenant Colonel Shields Warren, commanding the 1st Battalion, to move into the city and capture the bridge. He planned accordingly. Gavin was not trying to pin the blame on a subordinate. He approved of Lindquist waiting until Deplogue was secure and darkness approached. Gavin in his own book says that Lindquist followed his orders, secured his primary mission area, the high ground, then and only then moved on the bridge. So Browning ordered Gavin to not move on the bridge until the high ground was secured. Gavin, in turn, ordered Lindquist to move on the bridge without delay once the high ground was secured. Lindquist, in his turn, ordered Warren to move on the bridge once the high ground was secured. There was no misunderstanding or disobedience as assumed by MacDonald, and everyone followed their orders accordingly down the chain of command. The Corps commander directed that there was not to be an immediate attack on the bridge, and consistent with that order, there wasn't. The high ground was secured first. Then and only then was an attempt on the bridge made. That is all very simple, but when we get into the execution, things get a bit murkier. Back to MacDonald. Here is an instance on day one where Gavin seemed to lose his patience with Lindquist and ordered him to hustle up. This was when they were being told that the bridge was only lightly guarded. However, again, this is only as darkness approached. I have never seen anything to suggest that Gavin expected Lindquist to move on the bridge before securing the high ground or before darkness. That would be contrary to what Gavin said in his own book and would be contrary to Browning's specific order. And apparently Lindquist agreed that this incident took place. Here is an interesting letter found in the Rhine collection. It is from Gavin to Hugh Olsen, Gavin's Jeep driver during the operation. It was written long after the war in 1968. In the letter, Gavin is telling Olsen that he might be asked questions by MacDonald and/or Ryan, and Gavin is helpfully refreshing Olsen's memory on a few points important to Gavin for one reason or another. In a court of law, this might be considered tampering with a witness, but I'm not looking at Olsen's statements. I'm looking at Gavin's statements in this letter. In it, Gavin seems to be complaining about the timing of Lindquist's assault on the bridge. They were trying to get the 508 off its bottom to get the bridge. However, if you look closely, the priorities present themselves. 1. Consolidate our positions. 2. Clean out the Germans. 3. Get the 508 off its bottom. Again, nothing in this letter indicates that Gavin expected Lindquist to go after the bridge immediately after landing. He expected Lindquist to establish his position first, then go after the bridge under cover of darkness. Gavin may have been anxious to get the 508 off its bottom, but that was not until after consolidating their positions and after the high ground was secured. Here are notes of an interview with General Gavin conducted by either Ryan or one of his research assistants in 1967. In the interview, Gavin seems to trash Lindquist for having been a good administrator, but not a good combat officer. He just didn't have a killer instinct, implying to the interviewer that this might be why Lindquist was never promoted to Brigadier General by General Ridgway. During this interview, Gavin confirms that yes, he did instruct Lindquist before the jump to move on the bridge. But in this interview, Gavin never complains about the timing of Lindquist's move. He never claims Lindquist failed to move on the bridge when he should have. Over 20 years later, Gavin was not upset about the timing. Rather, Gavin was upset that Lindquist did not move on the bridge via the mudflats to the east. Rather, Lindquist decided to trust a member of the Dutch underground who offered to lead the attack through Nijmegen. Gavin may not have been happy about how the initial attack went down, but that was not because it didn't happen right after landing. He expected there to be a delay after the landing while the primary objectives were secured and darkness approached. Rather, he was upset because they followed some Dutch guy straight into town instead of sneaking around to the bridge via the mudflats. The first attack on the bridge took place sometime after dark. That much is agreed. And by the way, the darkness was total. There was no moon on September 17, 1944, so it was pitch black. What actually happened that night may always be a mystery. All we can do is report what the witnesses claim they saw and did. The commander of the 1st Battalion, Colonel Shield Warren, organized his battalion around his primary objective, Deplogue. According to him, at approximately 6:30 p.m., he ordered a platoon and his intelligence section to go into Nijmegen and investigate reports that the bridge was lightly defended. That patrol would probably consist of approximately 40 to 45 men, but definitely less than 50. Phil Nordyke's excellent history, All American All the Way, published in 2005, has more details on this patrol. A Lieutenant Weaver was given a radio and instructions to investigate the defenses on the bridge, seize it if possible, and then radio back to battalion. Unfortunately, the radio did not work and no one heard from this patrol until the next morning. Gavin's order to Lindquist before the jump was to secure his primary objective, then only after securing the high ground attack the bridge with a force up to but not exceeding the size of an entire battalion. Lindquist also had discretion to call off the attack if he needed to defend himself from the Reichswald, which he didn't. Nevertheless, this gave Lindquist considerable discretion as to the size and composition of the force sent into Nijmegen to make this day one attempt on the bridge. I suspect that Lindquist believed that this small patrol satisfied Gavin's order for a day one attempt on the bridge. However, upon hearing the rumor that the bridge might be only lightly held, Gavin insisted upon a more substantial attack to get the battalion off its bottom. According to Colonel Warren, at about 8 p.m., he was ordered to capture the bridge with his battalion. Oddly, Warren claims that this order came as a surprise. It is odd because his official written orders were to establish himself in his area of responsibility and then to be prepared to go into Nijmegen. So he claims to be surprised by an order that his written orders told him to expect. Now the timeline starts to get fuzzy. MacDonald says that Warren ordered A and B companies to converge at a point at 7 p.m., 1900 hours, and to go into the city together. Obviously, something is wrong. Warren claimed that he did not receive his order to attack the city until 8 p.m., but MacDonald says that Warren's order had already been given and the rendezvous was supposed to be an hour even before that. Here is a report prepared by Major Adams, commander of Company A, 1st Battalion, made in November of 1945, shortly after the war. This report was found in the Ryan collection. Adam claims that he received his orders around 6 p.m., 1800 hours. Interestingly, he does not mention going after the bridge itself, but rather meeting up with the Dutch underground and going to the control station for the explosives planted on the bridge. As it was getting dark, they reached the rendezvous spot, but Company B was late. Company A waited around for Company B until 10 p.m., 2200 hours. Company B never showed up, so Company A went into Nijmegen alone. Adams continues, the Dutchman led them not to the bridge but to several houses that he claimed were occupied by Germans but were empty. Then the Dutchman abandoned them. Then when they moved out, they were fired upon by Germans. Reading between the lines, it sounds like Adams believes that they were led on a wild goose chase by the Dutch guide, abandoned, and possibly even betrayed. That may or may not be true, but that is what Adams perceived. While they were battling the Germans near the traffic circle, Warren ordered Adams to take a platoon and destroy what they thought was the control station. They assaulted the supposed control station. There were Germans there, but nothing to indicate it was a control station for explosives for the bridge. Nevertheless, they burnt the building down. On their way back, they found themselves cut off. They had to barricade themselves in the city. Then they ended up holding out there until contact was made with the British on the 19th. Adam describes a clumsy effort. There were supposed to be two companies, but one got lost on the way to the rendezvous point, so there was only one company initially. The goal was unclear. Was it the bridge or the control station? Then they were delayed by various side quests suggested by the Dutch guide, who led them into an ambush and then abandoned them. You can sense Adams's frustration. Here is the report of Captain Woodrow Millsap, commander of the other company, Company B. Just before dark, they received orders to move out towards Nijmegen. He makes no mention of getting lost, but he does admit that Company A left before he did. He does not provide the level of detail provided by Adams, just that they encountered stiff opposition and beat off a counterattack after midnight. The next morning, Company A withdrew through Company B's positions. Then Warren just kind of disappeared. Putting together a timeline of events leading up to the first attack on the bridge is extremely difficult because the stories of the witnesses conflict, but a general chronology is possible. At 1:30 p.m., the 505 start landing. It took them about 2.5 hours to organize after the drop and start the march towards their primary objective, Deplogue. By 6:30 p.m., the 1st Battalion is established at Deplogue, and Warren sent a platoon from Company C along with his intelligence section into Nijmegen with a radio. They got lost and disappear until the next morning. There is nothing to support this other than my own supposition, but it is my belief that this probe by this platoon was Lindquist and Warren's attempt on the bridge as ordered by Gavin before the drop. However, based upon the relatively light opposition encountered by the 508 at Bergen-Dahl and Deplogue, Gavin expected a more substantial effort, up to or no more than a battalion. He was thinking the better part of a battalion. Around 7:30 p.m., as darkness approached, and as the rumors were swirling that the bridge was only lightly guarded, Gavin ordered the 508 to get off its bottom and get the 1st Battalion moving on the bridge. Lindquist, in turn, ordered Warren to move on Nijmegen with the help of a Dutch civilian, and Warren orders Companies A and B into Nijmegen. The two companies were to meet up before going together. Warren and his staff go with Company A to the rendezvous point, but Company B gets lost along the way. Warren and Company A wait around for Company B to show up for the better part of 2 hours. Company B never shows up. Finally, around 10 p.m., Company A moves into Nijmegen alone, the obvious goal being the bridge, but Adam tells us about various diversions, houses occupied by Germans, but not really, and an explosive control station that wasn't really a control station. Soon after, they meet up with stiff German resistance. They fought all night but failed to take the bridge. So did Gavin give Lindquist a pre-drop order to attack the bridge on day 1? Yes, Gavin ordered Lindquist to attack the bridge on day 1. However, the attack was not expected until after darkness and after securing Deplogue. Gavin did not expect an immediate attack on the bridge after landing. Pursuant to Browning's order to not make an attack on the bridge until all other objectives was secured, Gavin expected the high ground to be secured first and then the attack to be made later, under cover of darkness, about 6 or 7 hours later. Was Gavin's order complied with? Yes, but it was awkward. There was no misunderstanding between Gavin and Lindquist about these orders. At most, there was a difference of opinion as to how much of the battalion should have been committed to the attack under the circumstances. Gavin wanted an attack on the bridge via the mudflats by the better part of a battalion as soon as it got dark. He didn't get it. Warren just sent in a platoon and an intelligence section with a radio that promptly disappeared. Once darkness approached, Gavin got the 508 off its bottom, and most of the 1st Battalion was committed. That effort turned out to be clumsy and piecemeal. Company C sent in a patrol that disappeared until the next morning. Company B got lost. Company A had to go in alone and was led by a Dutch civilian straight into town on various wild goose chases and possibly abandoned right before an ambush. Not the best performance by the 508 1st Battalion. But that would be on Lindquist, Warren, Adams, and Millsap, not Gavin. Gavin's written order alerted the entire 508 to be ready to move on Nijmegen upon Gavin's orders. Nevertheless, Warren claimed to have been surprised by the order, and the coordination of his companies showed it. If blame had to be assigned, Warren could be criticized for the coordination of his companies. Lindquist could be criticized for failing to commit more to the initial attack given the light opposition that he encountered at Deplogue. That brings us to Gavin. If he wanted a day 1 attack on the bridge, he could have been more specific about what he expected. However, they were dropping out of a perfectly good airplane behind enemy lines into a hectic battlefield. They had no idea what conditions they were going to encounter that first day, so Gavin delegated some discretion to his subordinate to react to the conditions on the ground. That seems reasonable. Browning had made the high ground priority 1. Gavin complied with that directive by giving his subordinates the discretion to act according to that priority. Now, whether an attack as desired by Gavin, the better part of a battalion, after dark via the mudflats, would have been successful is speculation and an interesting what if. But that attack never happened. A future video might explore the day one defenses around the bridge and what type of attack would have been necessary to succeed. If you disagree with my conclusions, let me know in the comments. If you have any sources that dispute my findings, I'm willing to be proven wrong. Let me know. See you later.